it started. Okay, well, welcome to the informational webinar on Oregon's meat processing infrastructure and capacity building grant program. This has been several months in the making in terms of our developing of the rules and then development of the guidelines. Thank you everyone for your participation in our hearings and in the process of our stakeholder group to develop these rules. This grant was made available to us by the Oregon State Legislature. And largely the grant has three purposes that we'll need to discuss further as it pertains to your proposals and how it makes you more or less competitive for this grant. Phones on mute as we proceed. So the first goal is to increase the processing capacity for Oregon's farmers and ranchers. That feeds into the second one, which is the increase of availability of processing to ranchers, especially those that are in remote parts of the state. We've found that during the pandemic, the weaknesses in our supply chain have been laid bare, and Oregon has traditionally had a lower capacity for processing despite our relatively large number of cattle and other animals that we raise here in the state. And then the third that is noted in the statute is a desire to increase the availability of local meat for Oregon consumers, again addressing the supply chain challenges that we have. A couple of important dates that we want to make sure everyone is aware of. The grant period opened 2 days ago, and the applications will be due March 23rd. We want to make sure that you note that it is at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if you're over on the east side, please note that it's going to be an hour earlier. And that we need to make sure that people are adhering to that deadline so that we can keep our process for doing the review and relaying the recommendations to the director on time. Another key date for the grant is the funding period. Because this is general fund and it's coming with the schedule of biennium, we need to make sure that everything is completed by the end of the day, June 30th. So if you have equipment or other services that you are planning to fund with the grant, equipment or other materials need to be in hand. You need to have received them by June 30th, 2023. Anything that you will be spending the grant on needs to have been spent so that we can relay those receipts to our office for reimbursement if it's not already paid out through the initial disbursement. This is of particular concern given where we are with other constraints in the supply chain, including for equipment, and we want to make sure that that is something you're taking into consideration as you develop your grants, your grant applications. So the majority of the questions we've been receiving about the grant is if people are eligible. There are two primary and then three secondary requirements for the grant. The first one is that you must be an establishment in Oregon, or you must be planning to be an establishment in Oregon during the period of the grant. That means that you may not currently operate in Oregon, but you are going to have an establishment set up before June 30th, 2023. Need to demonstrate that that's going to be the case in your grant application. Second is that you must be registered to do business in Oregon and that you must be in good standing with the Oregon Secretary of State and the Oregon Department of Revenue. And as applicable, you can also fall under the jurisdiction of a tribal government. In addition to those, you must be one of the following. And these come directly from the statute that provided the money for the grant. You must be planning to expand processing capacity, and by expand we mean in addition to what currently exists, for animals, including animals raised in Oregon, and plan to operate under the program of state inspection. The state meat inspection program is scheduled to begin in summer of 2022. It's not yet in place, but it is under works. We had an update on that yesterday. If you have any questions about that, please save that for us. We have the food safety director with us, and he'll be able to answer questions about that. Second, you may be planning to build a new establishment for the processing of animals raised in Oregon and plan to operate under a program of state inspection. So both the expansion of existing or the construction of new facilities need to be under a program of state inspection. For those that are currently under federal inspection, a grant will pay for the expansion of capacity, so long as that expansion is going to increase the processing of meat from animals raised in Oregon. We expect there may be some questions about how that works under continuous inspection. Again, we'll address those in the Q&A at the end of the presentation. This grant is meant to cover the included list of eligible species. The reason for this is that these are going to be the animals that are covered by the state meat inspection program. Poultry and rabbit and seafood all fall under other regulatory structures, and so we will be focusing on the eligible animals. Some key points. We have provided the review sheet. This is the document that our review team will be using to evaluate each of the applications. We're providing that intentionally so that you're able to go through and see what it is that we will be looking for. Your application really should be addressing the constraint to processing in the state. It needs to do so concisely, and it needs to demonstrate how the business is going to be viable. When it comes to the explanation in the work plan, I want to emphasize that we are not looking for your business plan. We do not have the ability to necessarily protect all information that is shared with us from information requests from the public, and therefore what's shared with us needs to explain how it's going to work without actually providing confidential information. We have placed a limit of 16 pages to each application. We are doing that to encourage you to be concise and encourage you to be clear in what it is that you are planning to do, how it fits into the context of increasing capacity or relieving a bottleneck in what exists already in Oregon. We also want to make sure that you're aware of those time constraints. You need to demonstrate the feasibility in terms of funding. We do not have enough money in the grant to fully fund, I think, any of the projects, and so therefore identifying what is not funded by the grant and where you will be finding that funding. And it's always good to show that you have other partners that you're working with in your program. Matching funds or matching resources are not a requirement. It is something that's included on the review sheet, but it's not required. We have it there because it's always good to show that there is some skin in the game, so to say, that you are putting in your own time, putting in your own resources, that you are committed to the success of the program. The viability, again, we don't want the business plan, but we do want that holistic picture of how this is going to be a good investment of state funds, and it's going to achieve the objectives of the grant. Now, the deadline, as we mentioned, is March 23rd, and it needs to be to ODA by 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We have two means for delivering the grant. The first is through a file transfer protocol, and the other one is by mailing it directly to ODA. The FTP is one that we've been using for some years now for other grants. The link is here. There's a picture on the left of what that page looks like, or at least a smaller portion of it. Enter your name, enter your email address and a phone number. Please do tell us it's for the meat grant, and please do name your file as meat grant _ and your company name. This is going to make sure that we flag it for the correct people. It's not going to get mixed into another cycle of grants or other material that we're collecting from the public, and that we can keep your grant separate from other applicants. If you do mail it to ODA, please be certain to put the full address on, and it needs to be received by 12 p.m. on March 23rd. We will not be looking at the postmark date to see that it was by 12 p.m. that day, because we cannot be accepting applications whenever they do arrive. We will not be accepting applications due to mail delays. So if you are going to be mailing it, please be certain to do so far enough in advance that it's certain to reach us by 12 o'clock on March 23rd. We have set up a website. There is a shorter URL here, oda.direct/meat processing. That contains 3 links within it to additional information about the state meat inspection program for the grant and other resources for meat processors. Please go to this page to find the grant documents that were in the announcement, as well as our FAQ page that will be updated as we receive more questions and we develop the same answers for everyone to see at the same time. And if you have questions, please contact Gary Neuschwander. His email address and his phone number are included there. They're also included on the grant application. So with that information, and this is all available on our website, we would like to spend the majority of our time taking questions and responding to you as we can while we have this recording available. So if you may use the chat box or the raise your hand function in Teams, and we will go through those as best we can. There's a first question in the chat about hand delivering. We'll have to talk about whether the meat processors will be able to bring those to ODA, since that is a different group. Certainly hand delivery is an option. You can bring that to the ODA building. We'll have to look into setting up a place for you to drop that off. We want to make sure that everyone has the best option for getting it to us that's as convenient and certain to reach us, so that nobody's excluded. I see a hand up, but I need to figure out how to get to it in my list. There's a JM.
Yeah, this is Jeff. My question was, can you tell me a little bit about the difference between the state and federal inspections?
I think I will ask for our food safety director, Rusty Rock, to address that question for us.
Hi, Jeff. My name is Rusty Rock. I'm with the Department of Agriculture. I'm in the Food Safety, Animal Health, and Lab Services program area, and I'm currently working to create the rules related to the new state meat inspection program. Our intent is that it will be equal to the federal program that currently exists, the USDA FSIS. So it should be essentially the same process. Our intent is to be interactive and supportive of our industry.
So if we are currently being inspected by ODA, that would be the inspecting body for the state, and would they be the representative for the federal body, or would there be federal inspection on top of that?
With the state meat inspection program, it will be distinctly different than our existing ODA inspection process. Our current ODA inspection process is more of a regulatory visit rather than a continuous inspection model that the federal inspection model follows. The new state and meat inspection program will be the same as the current federal model. So we will be adopting a measure of continuous inspection at facilities that apply for and receive the grant of inspection from the state of Oregon.
And do you have an estimate on the cost of that continuous? If we were going to include that into our grant, do you have an idea of what would that cost be if that's something that we want to include in a part of that grant?
Yes. So the state meat inspection program will be not a fee for service, similar to the federal grant of inspection. You don't have to pay for inspectors to be on site and conduct that inspection work unless you are scheduling them into weekends or holidays or overtime. So it would be a free process that's covered under the legislated money that was set aside.
Thank you.
Kept up with what's coming in on the chat. So given the state of supply chain delays, how do you think that will impact the funding period deadlines for having spent the funds? If it continues to be an issue with delays, what are the other options for getting through that process? But we do not have another option for delays other than planning ahead and trying to do everything as early as possible. We do have a hard and fast date of the end of the day on June 30th. That's when our money turns into the proverbial pumpkin and is no longer ours to spend. So that's why we wanted to flag that date here at the beginning to make sure that that's understood. We run into this as a challenge in some other programs we've run, especially last year, where we also ran into supply chain issues, and we had to pick up some materials at the last day ourselves and drive them home because delivery wasn't going to make it in time. So I think that's as best as we can offer. Just take that into consideration as you're developing your plan. We do not have any plans for a state grant for poultry. We did have a call with USDA this morning in which a number of investments that USDA is making are going to be available to poultry as well. We can share that information on our website as well to make sure people are aware of the two, the state and the federal options. For facilities under USDA inspection, do we need to apply for state inspection as well? Rusty, can you explain the difference between having two of them?
Yes. So if you are currently under USDA inspection, you would not need to apply for the state inspection program. The state inspection program is essentially the same as the federal grant of inspection, so having both of them would not be a productive exercise. Everything you can accomplish under your current USDA inspection, you would be able to accomplish under the state inspection. In fact, you can do more under the federal, to tell you the truth.
And that's a good point right there for that question and answer, that the state inspection program is not meant to replace what's available through the federal government. It's meant to supplement or augment what is currently available. For facilities under USDA inspection, do we need to apply? Did that one? What is the timeline for becoming state inspected if I were to receive this grant?
So I think you want me to pick that one up, Jess?
Yeah, you would.
Yeah. So at this point, our timeline for starting our state meat inspection program is July 1st of this year, so 2022, which feels around the corner. As far as when you would need to, as far as the grant timing, I don't have a good grasp on how that would work, but the soonest we'll be able to start offering state inspection at this point is anticipated to be July 1st.
And the requirement for the grant is just that you have worked into the narrative of your application that you are setting up your operation to be inspected by the state. Let's see. Will this be allowed for use for engineering, design, or pre-steps of a new facility, as there would be no time for use of construction items in the short period? Yes, you would be able to use this funding for technical consultations and other services of that sort. Can be in addition to the purchase of equipment or contracting of construction. So understanding that with this short window that we have left, we need to kind of prioritize where the grant funding is going to be applied in addition to any other funding that's going to have to be applied for a project to be completed and viable. If we are USDA already, there will be no additional state inspection requirement, correct?
That is correct.
Yep. If my company is already to full capacity, am I eligible? Well, yes, that's what we're looking to do, is add to that capacity so that we can address some of the bottlenecks in the state. So it may be that the slaughter is the problem. I think we've heard from many of our stakeholders in our conversations that the bottleneck is actually after slaughter in further processing and storage. So the projects that can demonstrate how they are going to address those bottlenecks and increase the capacity for processing animals raised in Oregon are going to be more competitive for this grant. We have a question. We are a value-added business and operate under an ODA non-slaughtering meat processing license. Would we be eligible for this grant? We are planning to become USDA certified. So I think there's a couple of parts in this question. If you are planning to become USDA certified, this would not be a grant for that project. The criteria are that you are going to be expanding or building something new under state meat inspection, or you're an existing USDA facility that is looking to expand specifically so that you can incorporate more animals raised in Oregon into your processing. But if you are a slaughtering meat processing license E and you are looking to be under state inspection, actually, it's not your licensee type that is relevant to your eligibility, but rather the state meat inspection or the federal inspection, and what that relation is to the expansion of your or construction of a new facility.
We have someone who has their hand raised, Johanna Simons.
Thank you, Carol.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Where do we get the application at? And is the total max grant opportunity for per applicant 500,000?
Yes, it is. We did put a cap of 500,000 for the maximum that will pay out to any one application. We did that because we wanted to make sure that we weren't spending all $2 million on just one product. Hopefully we'll have more than four if we just do the five maximum. The four $500,000 maximum won't have more than four, but we did apply that for that reason. And the application materials are available at the website, oda.direct/meat processing.
Looks like we have another hand raised from Richard Pickering.
Yeah, I have a question. If my company was awarded the grant, I see that there's a 25% either additional or deduction from the amount asked. Explain to me a little bit about that, if you would, please.
Yeah, it's a good eye. So traditionally, our grants are awarded as a smaller amount up front and a reimbursement. So one of the constraints that we've discussed is the lack of availability to capital. And so we have made the effort to increase the amount that we are able to pay out up front, and then have a minimal amount for us to withhold for that final reporting at the conclusion of the grant to make sure that everything's been done the way that the state requires it to be done. So we have a 75% upfront payout and then a 25% reimbursement to the end of the project.
And that's from the original asking amount from the application?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Don't see any more hands raised. We'll go back to the chat. No. Hopefully I'm not passing it, but this is an interesting one. Will a state inspected facility use a USDA emblem logo on their packaged meat?
So I'll grab that one, and we'll circle back to the question that was right before that as well in a moment. But the ODA state meat inspection program will have its own logo that is different than the USDA logo. The USDA logo is protected and used only for their program. We will have our own logo, and we have yet to go through the design process of what that logo exactly will look like. I suspect it will be similar to the shape of the state of Oregon.
And the department will be doing a information campaign as the process gets started for using the state inspection program to inform the public what that emblem is, what it means, and make sure that everyone's comfortable with understanding that product coming from state meat inspection is no less safe and maybe even more desirable by virtue of being local and from the state of Oregon. And the question prior to that was, will the grant reimburse costs for early stages or project prior to grant issued? No, the grant will only pay for expenses that come from award of the grant. So we cannot pay for anything that precedes the grant. Noted that the process of application, we need to award. Following award, we need to actually enter into a contract with each awardee. Money cannot be spent until all parties have signed those documents, both on the sides of the applicant and by the state. And I believe the next question is, it has been noted that there could possibly be an option following a timeline for the services to cross state lines. Is there any further updates on this? Rusty, it's going to you again.
Yep. So that program, it does, there is such an option, and I'm drawing a blank on what the acronym is that allows that cooperative state inspection or something like that. So that type of inspection does exist, but at a minimum, we have to have our state meat inspection up and running for a year before we could apply to the USDA. We've also done some kind of analysis on that, and it's going to take statutory changes, which require the action of the legislature to change the laws of the state to enter into interstate commerce under state inspection would require that we have a higher level of identicalness, if that's a word, to what the federal program is. We would have to be same as our current program that we're looking to put in place is equal to. So we can use our own state laws as long as what we're accomplishing is equal to what the federal government does in their inspections. But to cross state lines, we would have to change our part of our program to be the same as. So we would actually have to adopt federal laws to do exactly everything the same as the USDA currently does it.
offer a moment to see if there's any follow-up questions from the person who asked that question or anyone else. You're able to unmute yourself, or we already have a few hands.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so my question with it would be, I had asked a question about what the timeline for us to become state inspected. So my question with that, to expand on it a little bit, our facility being older, there's things we can implement and use this grant to get us processing more animals at a quicker pace immediately, but then long-term goal to be state inspected, we are going to be needing a new facility. So would that be something we could kind of work into that to say, okay, instantly this equipment or this, money will help right now, but we also need, say, the engineering or, those planning things for an actual new building. Can we kind of combine that, or would it be better for us in the application process to keep them separate?
Sounds to me like that would need to be kept separate. The recipients of the grant need to be under state meat inspection during the period of the grant. So by June 30th. Or at least demonstrating good faith efforts to be under state meat inspection shortly thereafter. So that's a bit of a fudge, but it's also a gray area where we'll have to just hear what the plan is, an explanation of what it will take, and then the evaluation of our review team. Tori, does that answer your question?
It does. It just, I know with my question as far as, yeah, I know our building is just older right now. So in order to really, yeah, we wanted to go towards that state inspection aspect, but we're really needing a new facility. But this grant would help us to be able to, increase work right now while we're in the process of that. So we were just trying to kind of figure that out. I don't feel that we would be able to be state inspected immediately. There's a lot of just upgrades that we need to make to our current facility. Yeah, so I think timeline, we may be out for this one. So
I think that does bring up the point about what the narrative needs to include in each application. So identifying what you understand to be the constraint in the supply chain, and how your operation and what changes to that operation will do to improve the capacity and the utilization of animals in Oregon, and explaining where you are, what will be funded by the grant, what will not be funded by the grant, and what your plan is to fill that gap, whether it's through additional programs or what that timeline is going to take. That is really what that narrative needs to explain. So I wouldn't discourage you from looking at the application and putting all of that down. So, and then if you have questions, Gary Neuschwander is our point of contact. There are others from the department that can also weigh in as well. Going back to the people keep putting in questions, it keeps scrolling my list down. If the grant is awarded, how long do you have to state inspection before going USDA if desired? Rusty, can you address what it would be like to make a transition from state inspection to USDA if that was the direction that a facility wanted to take?
From my understanding, it would really be dependent on how fast the federal government could process the paperwork. Once you meet the requirements of the state meat inspection program, your facility should actually be capable of meeting the federal grant of inspection requirements as well, because our requirements will be equal to. So it would be just a matter of going through the paperwork and transitioning over. I can't speak to how quickly that process will go. Though I think the question that Jody was asking might be related to the grant, because the grant doesn't allow for new facilities to be built to go USDA. I think what the question is about is how long do they have to operate under the state inspection to qualify for the grant before they jump and change to go under federal inspection. That was the way I read it.
I see that reading now. Thank you. I don't believe we have an answer at this point for that question. That is one that we had not considered. So let us confer about that, and then we will respond to that question in our FAQ on the ODA Meet website.
And it looked like there was one question that was right above that I can address pretty quickly. And that was Jeff had asked, will value-added products under the new state inspection be allowed to be sold by a third party or direct sales only? And the answer to that is the state meat inspection program will allow for third-party sales, but only within the state of Oregon. So that's the main differential between federal inspection and state inspection at this point with our Equal To program, that any inspection work that we do, the sales would be limited to the state of Oregon, but you could sell at wholesale through third parties into distribution chains using the Oregon state seal as long as you stayed within the state of Oregon.
Thank you, Rusty. All right, next question on the list. Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that one of the purposes was to improve the supply chain for locally raised animals. I believe that a lot of the past and current backlog in Oregon meat slaughtering facilities is from entities that brought animals at very low prices in areas outside Oregon and transported them to Oregon for processing and sale. Are there any provisions to ensure that these new programs will indeed help local farmers and ranchers? Understanding that the constraint is largely from animals coming from out of state, intent of addressing capacity was to be able to bring more of the animals that are currently in the backlog through so that the animals in Oregon are able to be processed and not have the long wait times that we're experiencing. I believe we made the intent of what is in the guidelines and in the rule is that it is for animals, including those raised in Oregon. To mean that it isn't meant exclusively for animals from Oregon. You can process other animals. You just have to explain to us how you're going to be arranging your business to utilize the animals that are raised in Oregon. If that didn't answer that question fully, if you can please put another note in there or raise your hand and we'll come back to you. Next question was, will you please explain the cash match and in-kind match portions of the application in section 1? Those are a place for you to indicate the value of either cash that's being brought by the applicant to the project or the value of the time as in-kind that will be applied to the project. It's a demonstration of the commitment of the applicant to the overall success of the project. It is not a requirement, and we do not have a minimum value that needs to be applied, but it is a good indicator for just how much the applicants are putting into it in addition to what the grant will pay for. Can the grant be used for transport and logistics equipment? We have specifically addressed the need for example, cold storage. I think that the application would have to pretty well spell out how the constraint to capacity of processing animals in Oregon is being hindered by transport and logistics equipment in order for it to be one of the more competitive and therefore funded applications. So I believe that could be a part of the project, but there would have to be a pretty good case being made for how that is one of the more essential constraints that needs to be addressed by this money. Could this grant be used by a custom exempt processor to purchase a plant in a box, which would hypothetically be inspection ready immediately? And if you paid for it prior to the plant in a box being delivered, would that satisfy the spending requirement? The first part of that question is yes, it can be used for the purchase of whatever would look like a mobile slaughter facility, for example. However, it cannot have been purchased prior to the complete signing of the contract between the state and the awardee. So if it's already been purchased, it would not be eligible. Next question is, although also this may have been addressed, but can the grant be used for a new facility for meat if current operation is only state inspected for seafood processing? So it can be used for a new meat, as long as the facility is going to be used for the processing of meat. That it was previously used for seafood would not really be relevant. It would just be a matter of explaining what needs to be changed from the current state to the next in order for it to be able to process meat. Just pause a moment to see if one of my colleagues has anything we want to add to that. Rusty, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, your answer is correct. And it is important to differentiate that seafood is not meat, as strange as it is to have to say that. But the regulations around seafood are distinctly different than the regulations around meat processing. And meat processing is really all we're addressing with the grant and with our state meat inspection program. So oftentimes people will think of meat and they think of seafood or fish and shellfish, and those are under regulatory structures are not considered to be meat. They're just sources of protein, if that helps to differentiate.
Teresa, I saw you come on. Did you have an addition to that?
I just wanted to clarify that land cannot be purchased with this grant. So if it is purchasing a new facility, that is one of the exclusions.
Thank you. Next question, if an applicant applies for most of or all of the allowed cap, is the award an all or nothing proposal? Can part of the applicant's application be awarded and not other parts? There's discretion in the award process for the director to revise what is being awarded. In some parts, this might be necessary in order for us to fully utilize the funds. If we are going to award 5 applicants and the total is greater than 2 million, we would have to reduce some of those in order to come to the total. We don't want money going unutilized. So there will be a bit of a back and forth between those that we're looking to award to make sure that if we were to make that kind of adjustment, it wouldn't set the project up for failure, so to say. Next question is, what are the on-site requirements to accommodate a state inspector? Rusty?
So I think this question is rooted in the fact that oftentimes under the federal model, there's a requirement for maintaining an office, bathrooms, locked storage facilities, changing rooms for federal inspectors. Those are generally associated with larger plants. At this point in time, we're not intending that there are any requirements for maintaining a specific space or even a specific parking area for our inspectors. With smaller plants, that limitation is something that we generally are not going to hold our facilities to. What we will require is that we are allowed open access to the facilities at all times, that they're open for business, and cooperation in allowing for the inspectional activities.
Thank you, Rusty. Where can we find the rules and regulations for the state inspection program?
Do you want me to touch on that one?
I
Jess?
think that would be helpful.
Okay. So at this point in time, we are still in the process of formulating those rules and regulations. But the easy shortcut to that is if you go and review the federal rules and regulations related to meat inspection activities and what it would take to meet the grant of inspection for the USDA's FSIS, ours will be equal to that. So any requirements that you would find under USDA currently will be essentially what our requirements will be. Once our program gets up and the rules become available, we'll make sure that that information is available to the public.
Thank you, Rusty. Is a currently state-inspected poultry processing facility able to apply for this grant? Unfortunately, no. The eligibility will not apply to poultry processing. That is, unless the facility was going to be renovated in order to process any of the eligible species. That appears to be all of the questions that we have in the chat at this time. I'm looking for any raised hands. I see the raised hand. Richard Pickering, is that yours from a previous question, or do you still have a question to ask?
No, I have another question to ask. Do you have to currently have an inspected kill floor to be eligible for the organ meat inspection program? Or does mobile slaughter work with that?
No. Is this one mine, Jess?
I think that's another one that we need to have you answer.
Okay. So the answer is no. You don't have to have a kill floor to qualify under the state meat inspection program or under the grant. But what I will say is that mobile slaughter, while it would be considered, is very complex under the USDA requirements. So it would be a very high bar to reach to meet the federal requirements for a mobile slaughter facility. So I would suggest looking at that one very carefully.
Right. Yeah. Part of my plan would be to, on the infrastructure side of things, is build a stationary slaughter location. That way I didn't have those problems. I just wanted to make sure that without already having that in place, that I was still eligible for the application.
Yeah, and if you're planning to apply for state inspection, your stationary slaughter facility would then be eligible to under the grant guidelines. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jess.
Nope, that's correct. And we just ask that you be careful about how you make that explanation in your narrative in the grant application, explaining how that's going to work and how all the parts have to come together.
Very good. Thank you.
If you please also be certain to note on the review sheet, one of the criteria in there is that it is a project that is going to be used for other farmers and ranchers, or for a broad range of farmers and ranchers. So I encourage everyone to take a look at the review sheet. There are three main categories of criteria. Those that evaluate the proposal's address of the purpose and the impact, kind of how well the proposal has put together a picture for the budget and the work plan, what needs to be done, can it be done on time, and then the long-term viability of the project. Has the applicant adequately explained how it's going to be viable once the grant funds have expired? Does the applicant address the technical strengths and how they're going to make sure the project is viable? Does the applicant explain sufficient demand for the added processing capacity? And does the applicant address their technical, regulatory, and labor needs? Making sure that anything that's being funded is going to continue to be of use and not just sinking money into something that's not making a dent in what is otherwise a very large problem in the state.
So we have more questions in the chat, and then I think we're about out of time.
Yeah, we're running down to the last 10 minutes here. So please clarify once more, the grant is not to be used for FDA approved national meat sales, only for Oregon State inspection or Oregon State meat sales. Almost in that sense, if you're under the state meat inspection program, any product that is through those facilities would only be able to be sold within the state of Oregon. We are also funding expansions to currently federal inspection facilities for their use of animals raised in Oregon, and that those products could be sold in interstate commerce. I hope that's what you were looking for that who asked that question. Also to clarify, slaughter kill floor is not required. A further value-added process is acceptable. Yes, we are also considering further value-added and processing. Again, this gets back to where the constraint is. If we have sufficient slaughter, but we don't have enough cut wrap, or the constraint comes further down the chain in the development of further value add, then we need to see how that is addressed in the application and how that picture is drawn out. And if a new facility is planning to be USDA, this grant could be used. Is this correct? No, it would have to be an existing USDA facility. There was the question earlier about how long a facility that is new would have to operate under state meat inspection before it would be able to make a transition to USDA. And again, that is a question that we're going to have to go back and evaluate. It's not something we'd previously considered, but we will respond to that question in the FAQ page at the ODA state meat website. That is both on the cover of the grant and the guidelines. It is oda.direct/meat processing. Well, that brings us to the full hour, and if that is the last question, that is quite remarkable that we use the time basically perfectly. All right, thank you everyone for joining us. This is going to be an iterative process, so please reach out to us. We have provided the information for contacting Gary Neuschwander as our primary point of contact. We'll bring in others as necessary to respond to your questions, and we look forward to seeing what everyone comes up with. This is going to be an exciting continuation of what has been a long engagement with our stakeholders, and see how the state meat grant efforts couple with federal programs going into the future. All right.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you for joining us.
Bet.